The gunshot that rang through Willow Creek made Mabel Harrison drop her bouquet of wildflowers, her heart racing as she gathered up her skirts and ran toward the small white church at the end of the dusty street. It was supposed to be her wedding day, June 15, 1875, but fate had different plans for the reluctant bride. "He's dead," someone shouted from inside the church. "Barton's been shot." Mabel froze on the church steps, her white dress billowing around her in the warm Montana breeze. Dead. Her betrothed, the man her father had arranged for her to marry, was dead. She should feel grief, shock, or at least sympathy, but all she felt was a sudden, overwhelming sense of freedom that made her light-headed. Sheriff Colton emerged from the church, his weathered face grim as he approached her. "Miss Harrison, I'm sorry to tell you, is it true?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. "Yes, madam. Mr. Barton was shot through the window while waiting at the altar." "Looks like someone didn't want this wedding to happen." Whispers rippled through the gathering crowd. Mabel caught fragments of accusations that she had arranged it, that she had never wanted to marry the wealthy cattle baron who was 30 years her senior. None of it was true, at least not the part about arranging his murder. She had indeed dreaded the marriage, but she would never have wished him dead. "I need to get away," she whispered, backing down the church steps. The crowd's scrutiny felt like needles on her skin. "Miss Harrison, we'll need to ask you some questions," the sheriff called after her, but Mabel was already lifting her skirts, running down the street toward the livery stable. Behind her, she could hear her father shouting her name. She didn't stop. Barton's death had broken the chains that had bound her to a loveless marriage, but now she was suspected of murder. She needed time to think, to breathe. At the livery, she found a saddled horse someone's mount left ready for a quick departure after the wedding. Without hesitation, she gathered her voluminous dress and pulled herself into the saddle. The stable boy gaped at her, this bride in white fleeing on horseback. "Miss Harrison, you can't, I'll bring it back," she promised, though she had no idea if she could keep that promise. She dug her heels into the horse's sides and they burst from the stable into the street. Her father appeared in her path. "Mabel, stop this nonsense." She pulled the reins, turning the horse sharply to avoid him, and galloped out of town, the wind tearing at her veil and loosening her carefully pinned hair. She had no plan, no destination, only the desperate need to escape the whispers, the accusations, and the memory of a future she had dreaded but never wished to end like this. Hours later, as dusk painted the Montana sky in shades of pink and gold, Mabel's horse slowed to a walk. She had ridden hard, following no particular path, just pushing deeper into the wilderness that surrounded Willow Creek. Her wedding dress was torn and dirty, her veil long gone, and her dark hair hung in tangles around her face. The distant howl of a wolf reminded her of her precarious situation. She was alone in the wild with night falling, no provisions and no protection. The initial rush of adrenaline that had carried her from town was fading, leaving her cold and afraid. In the distance, she spotted a thin curl of smoke rising above the trees. A campfire or a chimney either meant people who might help her, or who might recognize her as the runaway bride suspected of murder. It was a risk she had to take. She guided her tired horse toward the smoke. As she emerged from the trees, she found herself on the edge of a small clearing. A cabin stood in the center, sturdy and well-built, with a corral for horses and a small garden plot. It looked lived in but not crowded, the home of someone who valued solitude. As she approached, the cabin door opened and a man stepped out, rifle in hand. In the fading light, she could make out broad shoulders, a strong jawline covered in stubble, and eyes that narrowed as they assessed the strange sight of a woman in a wedding dress arriving at his doorstep. "That's far enough," he called, his voice deep and wary. "State your business." Mabel reined in her horse, suddenly aware of how she must appear disheveled, desperate, a stranger on his property at nightfall. "Please," she said, her voice hoarse from hours without water. "I need help." The man studied her for a long moment, taking in the torn wedding dress and her exhausted posture. Slowly, he lowered his rifle. "Seems like you do." He stepped forward, reaching for her horse's bridle. "Come on down from there, you look about ready to fall." Mabel tried to dismount gracefully, but her legs were numb from hours in the saddle. As she slid down, her knees buckled. The stranger caught her before she hit the ground, his strong hands steady on her waist. "Easy now," he said, his voice gentler than before. "Thank you," she whispered, embarrassed by her weakness. "I'm sorry to impose on you like this. Let's get you inside." He kept one hand on her elbow as he led her toward the cabin. "Name's Drew Lambert, most folks call me Lamb." "Mabel Harrison," she replied automatically, then winced. If word of Barton's murder had spread, her name might be known. If Drew recognized her name, he gave no sign. He simply nodded and opened the cabin door for her. "Well, Miss Harrison, looks like you've had quite a day." The cabin's interior was simple but comfortable, a stone fireplace with a cooking pot hanging over low flames, a table with 2 chairs, a bed in one corner, and shelves holding books, tools, and provisions. It was the home of a man who lived alone but not without care for his surroundings. "Sit," Drew said, gesturing to a chair by the fire. "I'll fetch some water." Mabel sank into the chair gratefully, the warmth of the fire seeping into her chilled bones. She watched as Drew moved around the cabin with efficient grace, pouring water from a pitcher into a cup and bringing it to her. His hands were strong but gentle, and though he had the weathered look of a man who spent most of his time outdoors, there was an unexpected kindness in his blue eyes. "Thank you," she said, accepting the cup and drinking deeply. The water was cool and sweet, the best she had ever tasted. "You want to tell me why a bride is running through the wilderness alone on what should be her wedding day?" Drew asked, settling into the chair opposite her. Mabel stared into her cup, unsure how much to reveal. "There was an incident at the church. My betrothed was killed." Drew's eyebrows rose. "Killed and you ran?" "I didn't kill him," she said quickly, meeting his gaze. "But people think I might have, or that I arranged it. I needed to get away." "So you stole a horse and rode into the wilderness with no supplies, no direction, and no plan," he summarized, a hint of admiration in his tone. "That's either very brave or very foolish, Miss Harrison." "Probably the latter," she admitted with a weak smile. "I wasn't thinking clearly." "Few of us do when we're desperate." Drew stood and moved to a pot simmering at the edge of the fire. "You hungry?" As if in answer, Mabel's stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since breakfast, too nervous about the wedding to manage more than a few bites. Drew chuckled, a warm sound that made her feel less like an intruder. "I'll take that as a yes. It's just rabbit stew, nothing fancy." "It smells wonderful," she said honestly. While Drew ladled stew into 2 bowls, Mabel took the opportunity to study him more closely. He moved with the confidence of a man comfortable in his skin. His dark hair was a bit too long, curling slightly at the nape of his neck, and his face was tanned from the sun. He wore simple clothes, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms, and well-worn trousers tucked into boots that had seen many miles. "You live here alone?" she asked as he handed her a bowl of stew. "Just me and the horses," he confirmed, returning to his seat. "I train them for ranchers and the cavalry, gives me the freedom to live how I please." Mabel took a bite of the stew, savoring the rich flavor. "You're a good cook. Simple food for simple needs," he replied with a shrug. "Now, Miss Harrison, we should talk about what happens next." "I'm guessing you don't have a plan beyond tonight." The reality of her situation crashed back over her. She had nowhere to go, no money, and if she returned to Willow Creek, she would face questioning at best, arrest at worst. "No," she admitted, "I don't." "Well, you're welcome to stay here tonight," Drew said. "I'll take the bedroll outside. Tomorrow we can figure things out in the light of day." "I couldn't impose, it's no imposition. I've got spare blankets and I often sleep under the stars anyway." His tone was matter-of-fact, brooking no argument. "Finish your stew. You need your strength." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional whicker of horses from the corral outside. When they finished, Drew took her bowl and placed it in a basin of water. "You should get some rest," he said. "I'll take care of your horse and bring in your things if you had any." "I didn't bring anything," Mabel said, feeling foolish again. "I just ran." Drew nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I've got a spare shirt you can use for sleeping. That dress doesn't look comfortable." He rummaged in a trunk and pulled out a clean, if worn, cotton shirt, offering it to her with an almost shy gesture. "It's not much, but it's better than sleeping in all that." Mabel accepted the shirt, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Thank you for everything." "Don't thank me yet," Drew said with a wry smile. "Tomorrow might bring trouble for both of us, depending on who's looking for you." After he stepped outside to give her privacy, Mabel struggled out of her wedding dress, a complicated affair of silk and lace that had been suffocating her all day. She folded it as best she could, though it was beyond saving after her wild ride. Drew's shirt hung past her knees, the sleeves falling well past her fingertips, but it was clean and soft against her skin. When Drew knocked and asked if it was safe to enter, she called permission, suddenly self-conscious in her borrowed attire. He entered with a bedroll and extra blankets, which he arranged near the door. "I'll be just outside if you need anything," he said, his eyes carefully averted from her bare legs. "Mr. Lambert," she began hesitantly. "Drew," he corrected. "Drew," she amended with a small smile. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness to a stranger." He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "We're all strangers until we're not, Miss Harrison. Sleep well." With that, he stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind him. Mabel sank onto the bed, exhaustion finally overwhelming her. As she pulled the blankets around her, she realized this was not how she had expected her wedding night to unfold alone in a stranger's bed, her groom dead, her future uncertain. Yet despite everything, as she drifted into sleep, she felt safer than she had in months. The morning sun streaming through the cabin window woke Mabel from a deep, dreamless sleep. For a moment, she was disoriented, the unfamiliar surroundings confusing her. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back: the gunshot, her flight from town, finding Drew Lambert's cabin in the wilderness. She sat up, pushing her tangled hair from her face, and noticed a basin of fresh water on the table nearby, along with a sliver of soap and a comb. Drew had thought of her needs before she even woke. The gesture brought unexpected tears to her eyes. After washing her face and combing the worst tangles from her hair, Mabel faced the dilemma of what to wear. Her wedding dress was filthy and torn, and she couldn't continue wearing only Drew's shirt. As if anticipating this problem, she found a pair of trousers and a smaller shirt folded on a chair, still too large for her, but better than nothing. She had just finished rolling up the sleeves and pant legs when a knock came at the door. "Miss Harrison, are you decent?" "Yes, come in," she called, feeling strangely shy. Drew entered, carrying a bucket of fresh milk. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of her in his clothes, but he made no comment beyond a simple "good morning." "Good morning," she replied. "Thank you for the clothes." "They belong to my younger brother," Drew explained, setting the milk on the table. "He left some things behind last time he visited. They're still too big for you, but better than that dress, I figured." "Your brother visits often?" Mabel asked, curious about this man who had shown her such kindness. "Not as much as our mother would like," Drew said with a small smile. "He's in Colorado now, working the silver mines." He gestured to the stove where coffee was brewing. "Hungry?" "Yes, but please let me help," Mabel insisted. "I feel useless enough as it is." Drew studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, you can fry the bacon while I make the biscuits." They worked together in the small kitchen space, moving around each other with growing ease. Mabel was surprised to find herself relaxing, even smiling as Drew told her about his horses and his life in this peaceful corner of Montana territory. By the time they sat down to eat, the awkwardness between them had mostly dissolved. "So," Drew said as they finished their meal, "we need to talk about what happens next. You can't stay hidden forever." Mabel sighed, her brief respite from reality ending. "I know. But I can't go back to Willow Creek, not yet. Not until they find who really killed Barton. Tell me about him, Drew suggested. You're betrothed. What kind of man was he? Mabel stared into her coffee cup, gathering her thoughts. Barton Wells was a cattle baron, the richest man in the territory. He was nearly 50 years old and had never married. My father, he arranged the match, said it would secure our future. And you didn't want to marry him, Drew observed quietly. No, she admitted, but I had no choice. My father's store is failing and we have debts. Barton offered to clear them all in exchange for my hand. She looked up, meeting Drew's gaze. I didn't love him, I didn't even like him much. He was controlling and had a temper, but I never wished him dead. Did he have enemies? Mabel gave a hollow laugh. Many. He wasn't well liked despite his wealth. He had feuds with other ranchers over water rights and grazing land, and there were rumors. What kind of rumors? That his first fortune didn't come from cattle but from robbing stagecoaches, that he drove smaller ranchers off their land by force. That he? She hesitated, then continued that he had a wife before in Texas who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Drew whistled softly. Sounds like the list of people who might want him dead is long indeed. Yes, but I'm the convenient suspect, Mabel said bitterly. The reluctant bride who fled the scene. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her situation hanging between them. I could ride into Willow Creek, Drew finally suggested. Ask around, find out what people are saying, who they suspect, if the sheriff's looking for you. Mabel shook her head vehemently. No, it's too dangerous. If anyone connects you to me, you could be arrested as an accomplice. I can be discreet, Drew assured her. I need supplies anyway. It would be natural for me to stop in town. Before Mabel could argue further, a sound outside caught their attention: horses approaching. Drew was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with practiced stealth. Riders, he said quietly. 3 of them. Mabel's heart began to race. The sheriff? Drew shook his head. Don't think so. No badges that I can see. His expression darkened. I recognize one of them, though, Jeb Harker. Works for the Carson Ranch, but he's trouble, always in fights, been suspected of rustling. What would they want here? Mabel asked, fear creeping into her voice. Nothing good. Drew moved away from the window and grabbed his rifle from beside the door. Go into the back room and stay quiet. Don't come out no matter what you hear. Drew, go, Mabel, now. The urgency in his voice compelled her to obey. She slipped into the small back room that served as Drew's storeroom, leaving the door cracked just enough to hear what was happening. She heard the riders stop outside, then heavy footsteps on the porch. Lambert, a rough voice called. Got a minute? Morning, Harker. Drew's voice was casual, but Mabel could hear the wariness beneath it. What brings you out this way? Looking for someone. A woman. Ran off from Willow Creek yesterday after her betrothed got himself shot at the altar, riding a bay gelding with a white star. Seen anyone matching that description? Mabel's breath caught in her throat. They were looking for her. Can't say that I have, Drew replied evenly. Been busy with the new colts. Haven't seen any brides galloping through my property. Mind if we look around? Harker's tone made it clear it wasn't really a request. I do mind, actually, Drew said, his voice hardening. This is private property, Harker. You boys aren't the law. If Sheriff Colton wants to search my place, he can come out here himself with a proper warrant. There was a tense silence, and Mabel could imagine the men squaring off. Heard you were in town the day before yesterday, Harker said, changing tactics. Mighty convenient timing. Needed supplies, Drew replied. And information's traveling fast if you already know who you're looking for. Murder was just yesterday, wasn't it? Word travels fast when a bride runs from her own wedding covered in her groom's blood, a different voice said. Mabel had to stifle a gasp. Covered in blood? She hadn't been anywhere near Barton when he was shot. Well, I haven't seen her, Drew insisted. And I'd appreciate it if you'd move along now. I've got horses to train. We'll be watching you, Lambert, Harker warned. Carson thinks you've been eyeing his land for too long anyway. Be a shame if we had to tell the sheriff you're harboring a murderer. Sounds like a threat, Harker. Take it how you want. Let's ride, boys. Mabel listened as the men's footsteps retreated, followed by the sound of horses moving away. Only when Drew opened the storeroom door did she realize she'd been holding her breath. "They're gone," he said, his expression grim. "For now." "They said I was covered in blood," Mabel whispered, horrified. "I wasn't anywhere near Barton when he was shot. I was still walking to the church." Drew frowned. "Someone's spinning tales then, making you look guilty?" "But why? Who would want to frame me for murder?" "I don't know," Drew admitted, "but I aim to find out." He moved to a trunk in the corner of the main room and pulled out a gun belt, buckling it around his waist. "I'm going to town." "No," Mabel grabbed his arm. "It's too dangerous. They're watching for you now." "Which is exactly why I need to go," Drew insisted. "If I don't show up in town after their visit, it'll look suspicious. Besides, we need information." Mabel knew he was right, but fear for his safety made her reluctant to let him go. In just a day, this stranger had become her only ally, her protector. "What if they follow you back?" "They won't," Drew said confidently. "I know these hills better than they ever will." He gently disentangled her hand from his arm, but didn't immediately let go. "I'll be careful, Mabel, I promise." The way he said her name, soft, almost intimate, made her heart flutter in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She nodded slowly. "All right, but please be careful. Keep the rifle by you," he instructed, handing her the weapon. "Stay inside, away from the windows. I'll be back before dark." After Drew rode away, Mabel found herself alone with her thoughts and fears. The cabin, which had felt like a sanctuary just hours ago, now seemed vulnerable and exposed. Every sound from outside made her jump: a bird calling, a branch scraping against the roof, the whicker of horses in the corral. To distract herself, she began tidying the already neat cabin. She washed their breakfast dishes, swept the floor, and folded blankets. When those tasks were done, she explored the shelves of books that lined one wall. Drew was clearly a reader. She found volumes of poetry, histories of the West, and dog-eared copies of novels by Dickens and Twain. One book caught her eye, a journal bound in soft leather. She hesitated, knowing it was private, but curiosity overcame her scruples. She opened it to find not a personal diary, but sketches, beautiful, detailed drawings of horses in motion, landscapes, and occasionally people. Drew was an artist, capturing the wild beauty of his surroundings with skilled hands. Near the back of the journal, a sketch made her pause. It was a woman's face, rendered with particular care and attention. Something about the eyes seemed familiar, and with a shock, Mabel realized it was her own face, drawn from memory after just one day of acquaintance. The portrait captured not just her features, but something of her spirit, a blend of vulnerability and determination that she had never recognized in herself before. She closed the journal quickly, feeling as though she had intruded on something deeply personal. Drew saw her, truly saw her, in a way no one ever had before. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness. By late afternoon, Mabel found herself pacing anxiously, watching the path that led toward town. Drew had promised to return before dark, and the sun was already dipping toward the western mountains. When she finally heard hoofbeats approaching, she grabbed the rifle and moved to the window, peering cautiously around the edge of the curtain. Relief flooded her when she recognized Drew's tall figure on his distinctive black stallion. He was alone, and from what she could see, unharmed. She flung open the door as he dismounted. "Thank goodness you're back. I was worried sick." Drew's expression was somber as he led his horse to the corral. "Let me tend to Shadow, then we'll talk." Mabel's relief turned to apprehension. Whatever news he brought from town wasn't good. She waited impatiently while he unsaddled his horse and gave it water and grain. When he finally entered the cabin, she couldn't contain herself any longer. "What did you find out? What are people saying?" Drew sighed, setting a bag of supplies on the table. "It's worse than we thought, Mabel. The sheriff's issued a warrant for your arrest. They're saying you hired someone to kill Barton because you didn't want to marry him." Mabel sank onto a chair, her legs suddenly weak. "But that's absurd. I had no money to hire anyone, and I was going through with the marriage despite my feelings." "There's more," Drew said grimly. They claim to have a witness, a stable boy who says he overheard you talking to a stranger the day before the wedding, arranging to have Barton shot during the ceremony. That's a lie, Mabel protested. I never spoke to anyone about. She stopped abruptly as a memory surfaced. Wait. I did talk to someone at the stables. My friend Margaret came to see me while I was saying goodbye to my horse. I was crying, telling her I wished I could escape the marriage. The stable boy, Tommy, was there mucking out stalls. He must have heard us. And twisted your words, Drew concluded. Or was paid to lie about what he heard. But why? Who would want to frame me? Drew pulled a chair close to hers, his knees almost touching hers as he leaned in. That's what I spent most of my time in town trying to figure out. I asked around, careful-like, about Barton's business dealings, his enemies. He hesitated, then continued. Mabel, did you know that, with Barton dead, his entire estate goes to his business partner, Marcus Carson? Mabel frowned. The rancher those men work for. No, I didn't know they were partners. Not just partners. Carson owed Barton money, a lot of it. With Barton dead and no wife or children to inherit, Carson gets the ranch, the cattle, and all debts between them are canceled. So Carson had Barton killed, Mabel said, understanding dawning. And framed me for it, Drew nodded. That would be my guess, and he's using his men to make sure you don't come back to clear your name. Mabel stood and began pacing the small cabin. We have to go to the sheriff, tell him what we suspect. With what proof? Drew asked. It's just suspicion right now, and the sheriff might be in Carson's pocket too, for all we know. Then what do? I can't hide here forever, and I won't let you put yourself in danger for me anymore. Mabel stopped pacing, facing Drew with determination. I need to clear my name. Drew stood, closing the distance between them. We need evidence, something that links Carson to the murder. But how do we get that? We can't exactly march onto his ranch and search his belongings. Drew's expression turned thoughtful. Maybe we don't have to. Carson has a foreman, Jake Miller. Word in town is they've had a falling out recently. Miller's been drinking heavily, saying things that have Carson worried. You think this Miller might know something? It's worth a try. He usually drinks at the Broken Spoke, out past the crossing. It's a rough place, but I could go, see if he's willing to talk. We could go, Mabel corrected. If he knows something about Carson and Barton, he might be more willing to talk to the woman Carson framed. Drew shook his head firmly. Too dangerous. You're wanted for murder, remember? I could disguise myself, Mabel insisted. Cut my hair, wear your brother's clothes. No one would look twice at a young man in a saloon. Mabel, Drew, please. This is my life, my future at stake. I need to do something besides hide and wait. They locked eyes in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Drew sighed. You're the most stubborn woman I've ever met, you know that? Mabel smiled for the first time that day. I'll take that as a compliment. It wasn't meant as one, Drew grumbled, but there was a reluctant admiration in his eyes. Fine, we'll both go. But you follow my lead, stay close, and if there's any sign of trouble, we leave immediately. Agreed, Mabel said, relief and determination mingling in her voice. Drew studied her for a moment, then reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture was gentle, intimate, making Mabel's breath catch. We'll need to cut this, he said softly. A shame. It's just hair, Mabel replied, though her voice wasn't as steady as she would have liked. It will grow back. Yes, Drew agreed, his hand lingering near her face. Once your name is cleared and you're free. The way he said free made Mabel wonder what kind of freedom he was imagining for her and whether it included him. That evening, Drew carefully cut Mabel's long, dark hair, transforming her into a passable young man. With her hair cropped short and wearing his brother's clothes, she looked like a slender youth of perhaps 18. They practiced her walk and mannerisms until Drew was satisfied she could maintain the disguise. They set out after nightfall, riding double on Shadow to avoid taking a second horse that might be recognized. Drew's body was warm against Mabel's back as they rode through the darkness, his arms around her waist as he held the reins. The intimacy of their position wasn't lost on either of them, adding a layer of tension to their already dangerous mission. The broken spoke was exactly as Drew had described it, a ramshackle building glowing with lamplight, the sounds of a badly tuned piano and drunken laughter spilling from its open doors. They dismounted a short distance away, and Drew gave Mabel final instructions. "Keep your hat low, don't speak unless necessary, and stay close to me. Your name is Matthew if anyone asks. You're my cousin from Colorado visiting for the summer." Mabel nodded, adjusting her hat. "I'm ready." Drew's eyes softened as he looked at her. "You're braver than most men I know, Mabel Harrison." Inside, the saloon was crowded and smoky, filled with cowboys, miners, and drifters. Drew led Mabel to a corner table with a good view of the room, ordering whiskey for himself and my young cousin here when a barmaid approached. "Is that Miller?" Mabel asked quietly, nodding toward a grizzled man drinking alone at the bar. Drew shook his head. "No, Miller's younger, dark beard, usually wears a red bandana." His eyes scanned the room. "There, by the card table." Mabel followed his gaze to a man in his 30s with a dark beard and the promised red bandana. He was watching a poker game but not participating, a half-empty bottle on the table before him. "How do we approach him?" she whispered. "Carefully," Drew murmured. "He's Carson's man, even if they're feuding. Let me handle it." They sipped their drinks, watching Miller for nearly an hour. As the night wore on, he drank steadily, his posture growing more slumped, his expression darkening. When he finally stood, swaying slightly and headed toward the back door, Drew nodded to Mabel. "Now's our chance. Follow me, but stay back a bit." They made their way through the crowded saloon and out the back door into a small yard where a few horses were hitched. Miller was leaning against the wall, smoking a cigarette and staring at the night sky. "Evening, Miller," Drew said casually, approaching the man. "Nice night." Miller squinted at them suspiciously. "Do I know you?" "Name's Lambert. I train horses north of Willow Creek." "This here's my cousin Matthew." Miller grunted, taking another drag on his cigarette. "What do you want, Lambert? I'm not in a sociable mood." "Just thought you might want to talk," Drew said, leaning against the wall beside Miller. "Heard things aren't so good between you and Carson these days." Miller stiffened. "Who's been talking?" "People talk," Drew shrugged. "Especially after what happened to Barton Wells." Miller's eyes narrowed. "What's Barton got to do with anything?" "Maybe nothing," Drew said innocently. "Unless you know different." Miller flicked his cigarette away angrily. "I don't know what you're fishing for, Lambert, but I don't like it." "Just looking for the truth," Drew said, "about who really killed Barton Wells." "The Harrison girl killed him," Miller spat. "Everyone knows that." "Do they?" Drew's voice was calm but challenging. "Or is that just what Carson wants people to think?" Miller's hand moved to his gun. "You calling my boss a liar?" "I'm calling him a murderer," Mabel said, stepping forward and removing her hat. In the dim light from the saloon windows, her feminine features were suddenly apparent. "And I think you know it." Miller's eyes widened in recognition. "You're her, the bride." His hand tightened on his gun. "Yes," Mabel said steadily. "And I didn't kill Barton Wells, but I think you know who did." Miller looked from Mabel to Drew, then back again, indecision warring on his face. Finally, he sighed, releasing his grip on his gun. "Not here," he said in a low voice. "Too many ears. Meet me at Dawn Creek Crossing in an hour if I'm not followed." Before they could respond, he pushed past them and disappeared around the side of the building. "Do you think he'll come?" Mabel asked as Drew led her quickly to where Shadow was tethered. "Hard to say," Drew replied, helping her mount before swinging up behind her. "But it's the only lead we've got." They rode to Dawn Creek in tense silence, both aware that Miller might be setting a trap. The crossing was a shallow ford where the creek widened, surrounded by cottonwood trees that rustled in the night breeze. Drew positioned them in the shadows where they could see anyone approaching. An hour passed, then half of another. Mabel was beginning to think Miller had lied to them when they heard the sound of a horse approaching at a walk. "Stay here," Drew whispered, drawing his pistol. "I'll make sure he's alone." Mabel watched anxiously as Drew slipped through the shadows to intercept the rider. After a brief, hushed conversation, he motioned for her to join them. Miller had dismounted and was standing beside his horse, looking nervous. Make it quick, he said as Mabel approached. I'm taking a big risk coming here. Tell us what you know about Barton's murder, Mabel said without preamble. Miller glanced around as if expecting to find someone listening from the shadows. Carson planned it, he admitted finally. He and Barton were partners, but Barton was forcing him out, calling in loans Carson couldn't pay. Carson knew if Barton married you, he'd have an heir eventually, and Carson would get nothing when Barton died. So he had him killed at the wedding, Drew said. And framed Mabel, Miller nodded. Carson hired a man named Rafe Donnelly to do the shooting. Told him to make sure it happened during the ceremony when everyone would be watching you. He looked at Mabel. Carson had already spread rumors that you didn't want the marriage. It was easy to make people believe you'd arranged it. Why are you telling us this? Mabel asked. You work for Carson. Worked, Miller corrected. I'm leaving. Carson doesn't know I overheard him and Donnelly arguing about payment the night after the murder. Donnelly wanted more money because of all the witnesses. When I asked Carson about it, he threatened me, said I'd end up like Barton if I didn't keep my mouth shut. He paused. I may not be an honest man, Miss Harrison, but I don't abide murder, especially not framing an innocent woman for it. Will you testify to this? Drew asked. Tell the sheriff what you know, Miller laughed bitterly. The sheriff's in Carson's pocket, has been for years. No, I'm heading to Oregon, but I'll write out what I know, sign it. Maybe that'll help. While Drew found paper and a pencil in his saddlebag, Mabel processed what she had learned. Carson had murdered Barton and framed her, all for money and land, and he had nearly succeeded. Miller wrote quickly, his statement detailed and damning. When he finished, he signed it with a flourish and handed it to Mabel. Hope this helps clear your name, miss. For what it's worth, I'm sorry for my part in it. Thank you, Mabel said sincerely. This is more than I hoped for. Miller mounted his horse. One more thing, Donnelly's still in the area. Carson's keeping him close, probably afraid he'll talk. He's staying at Carson's hunting cabin up near Beaver Ridge. With that, he tipped his hat and rode away into the darkness. What now? Mabel asked, looking at the statement in her hands. Miller's right about the sheriff. Drew was thoughtful. We need more than just this statement. We need Donnelly, too. If we can get him to confess, along with Miller's statement, we might be able to convince the territorial marshal to investigate. He outranks the local sheriff and isn't in Carson's pocket. So we go to Beaver Ridge, Mabel said with determination. Drew looked at her with a mixture of admiration and exasperation. You really don't give up, do you? Not when my life is at stake, she replied, and not when I have someone worth fighting for. The words slipped out before she could stop them, and in the moonlight, she saw Drew's expression change, softening into something that made her heart race. Mabel, he said softly, stepping closer to her. When this is over, she interrupted, suddenly brave, I'd like to come back to your cabin if you'll have me. Drew's hand came up to touch her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. I'd like nothing better, he said, his voice rough with emotion. For a moment they stood in the moonlight, the promise of a future hovering between them. Then Drew sighed and stepped back. But first we have a killer to catch and your name to clear. They rode through the night, heading for Beaver Ridge. The hunting cabin was isolated, accessible only by a narrow trail that wound through dense forest. They approached cautiously as dawn was breaking, leaving shadow tethered a safe distance away. The cabin was small, little more than a shack really. Smoke rose from its chimney, indicating someone was inside. Drew and Mabel crept closer, staying low and using the trees for cover. Through a dirty window, they could see a man sitting at a small table cleaning a rifle. Donnelly, presumably. What's the plan? Mabel whispered. I'll go in first, Drew said. Keep him talking, try to get him to admit what he did. You stay hidden but where you can hear. If he confesses, we'll have 2 witnesses to his words. And if he doesn't confess, or if he tries to shoot you, Drew patted his holstered pistol. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. Before Mabel could argue further, Drew stood and approached the cabin openly, as if he had nothing to hide. He knocked on the door and Mabel held her breath as it opened, revealing a wiry man with a scar across his chin. Morning, Drew called cheerfully. Sorry to intrude. My horse threw a shoe a mile back. Wondered if I could trouble you for some water and maybe directions to the nearest town. Donnelly regarded him suspiciously but stepped aside. Water's in the bucket, town's that way. He pointed vaguely west. Mabel crept closer to the cabin as Drew went inside, positioning herself beneath the open window where she could hear every word. Obliged, Drew was saying. Been riding since yesterday, coming from Willow Creek. Willow Creek, huh? Donnelly's voice was wary. Heard there was some excitement there recently. You could say that, Drew replied. Mabel could imagine him taking a casual sip of water. Murder at a wedding. Groom shot right at the altar, whole town still talking about it. That's so. Donnelly didn't sound particularly interested. MMHMM. Sheriff's looking for the bride, thinks she arranged it. A short laugh. Women can't trust him. I don't know, Drew said thoughtfully. Seems odd to me. Why would she show up to the wedding at all if she'd arranged to have him killed? Why not just run beforehand? Silence for a moment. Then, maybe she wanted to see it happen. Make sure the job was done right. Maybe, Drew conceded. Though from what I hear, the shooter was a professional, clean shot through a window from quite a distance, not the kind of job you'd need to supervise. Mabel could hear movement inside, the creak of a chair. You seem mighty interested in this murder, stranger. Just making conversation, Drew said easily. Though I did hear something interesting in town. They say Carson, that big rancher, has suddenly come into a lot of property that used to belong to the dead man. Convenient timing. What are you implying? Donnelly's voice had gone cold. Not implying anything, Drew said. Just noting that when a man gets killed, it's usually wise to look at who benefits. In this case, not the bride. She lost a wealthy husband and is now a fugitive, but Carson, he gained everything. You should be careful what you say about powerful men, Donnelly warned. Could get you killed. Like Barton Wells? Drew asked, his casual tone gone. Was he killed because he was about to marry and produce an heir that would cut Carson out of his fortune? Is that why Carson hired you to shoot him during the wedding? The sound of a chair scraping back, then the metallic click of a gun being cocked. You're not looking for directions, Donnelly growled. Who are you? Someone who knows what really happened, Drew said calmly. I know Carson hired you to kill Barton and frame the bride. Jake Miller told us everything before he left for Oregon. Miller's a dead man, Donnelly snarled. And so are you. Mabel's heart was pounding so hard she was sure they could hear it inside. She peered through the window, seeing Donnelly pointing a pistol at Drew, who stood with his hands slightly raised. Killing me won't help you, Drew said. The U.S. Marshal already has Miller's signed statement. They're probably at Carson's ranch right now. You're lying, Donnelly said, but he sounded uncertain. Am I? Why take the chance? Carson will throw you to the wolves to save himself, you know that. But if you confess, testify against him, the judge might go easier on you. Donnelly's gun hand wavered slightly. I was just doing a job. Carson planned it all. Tell me, Drew urged. Tell me how it happened. To Mabel's amazement, Donnelly began to talk, seemingly relieved to share the burden of his secret. He described how Carson had hired him to shoot Barton during the wedding ceremony, how he'd positioned himself in the bell tower of the church with a clear shot through the window, how Carson had already spread rumors about the bride's reluctance to create suspicion. Never liked killing a man at his wedding, Donnelly admitted, but Carson paid well, or was supposed to. Been arguing with him ever since. He owes me another $100 for the clean job I did. And now you're hiding out here until things cool down, Drew concluded. Carson's idea, not mine, Donnelly said. Said I should lay low for a few weeks, then he'd get me passage to California. He's using you, Drew said, keeping you closed so you can't talk. Once the bride is caught and hanged for the murder, he'll have no reason to keep you alive. A dead man can't testify against him. Donnelly's face showed the dawning realization that Drew was right. That bastard, he muttered. He would do that. Help us bring him down, Drew urged. Testify about what really happened. Mabel held her breath, waiting for Donnelly's response. For a long moment the gunman was silent, considering his options. Then slowly he lowered his pistol. "All right," he said finally, "but I want protection and a reduced sentence." "I can't promise that," Drew said honestly. "But I can promise that without your testimony, Carson will get away with murder and you'll likely take the fall." Donnelly nodded grimly. "Then I guess I don't have much choice." Later that day, as they rode toward the territorial capital with Donnelly securely bound and riding ahead of them, Mabel marveled at how quickly her life had changed. 3 days ago, she had been a reluctant bride, facing a future of loveless marriage to a man she didn't respect. Now she was riding double with a man she barely knew but already cared for deeply, pursuing justice and a chance at a life of her own choosing. "What are you thinking?" Drew asked, his voice close to her ear as they rode. "About how strange life is," she replied. "How the worst day of my life led me to you." His arms tightened around her waist. "I'm glad it did, though I wish it had been under better circumstances." "Do you think this will work?" she asked, nodding toward Donnelly. "Will the marshal believe us?" With Miller's statement and Donnelly's testimony, yes, Carson won't escape justice this time. She leaned back against his chest, drawing strength from his steady presence. "And after, what happens then?" Drew was quiet for a moment. "That depends on you," he finally said. "You'll be free to go wherever you want, do whatever you choose. And if I choose to stay with you," she held her breath, waiting for his answer, "then I'd be the happiest man in the territory," he said simply. "I know it's fast, Mabel. We've known each other only days. But sometimes life doesn't give you years to make up your mind." "No," she agreed. "Sometimes it gives you a moment of clarity instead." They rode the rest of the way in companionable silence, both aware that challenges still lay ahead but confident they would face them together. 2 weeks later, Mabel stood in the corner of Drew's cabin, her face hidden in her hands as she tried to control the overwhelming emotions washing through her. The territorial marshal had believed their evidence, arrested Carson for the murder of Barton Wells, and cleared Mabel's name. Her father had been stunned by the truth, but relieved to have his daughter exonerated. He'd even given his blessing when she told him she wouldn't be returning to Willow Creek to live. Now, back in the cabin where she had found refuge and unexpected love, she was overcome by all that had happened: the narrow escape from a loveless marriage, the terror of being hunted for a murder she didn't commit, the bravery and kindness of the man who had risked everything to help her. She heard Drew's footsteps as he entered the cabin, felt his presence behind her. His hands gentle on her shoulders, he turned her to face him. "Mabel," he said softly, lifting her chin so she had to meet his gaze. "Why are you hiding your beautiful face in the corner?" "I'm not hiding," she whispered, though she had been. "I'm just overwhelmed by everything, by you." Drew's smile was tender as he brushed a tear from her cheek. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known. You faced down murderers and liars, cleared your name, and won your freedom. Never hide that strength, that beauty." "I love you," she said, the words coming easily now. "I think I have since that first night when you took in a stranger in a wedding dress and made her feel safe." "I love you too," Drew replied, his voice husky with emotion. "I think I started falling for you the moment you insisted on cutting your hair and riding into danger with me, too stubborn to stay safe." Mabel laughed through her tears. "We're quite a pair, aren't we?" "The best kind," he agreed, drawing her closer. "The kind that faces whatever comes together." As his lips met hers in a kiss that promised a lifetime of adventure, partnership, and love, Mabel knew she had found not just safety but a home, not in a place, but in the heart of a man who saw her strength and her vulnerability and treasured both equally. Outside, the Montana wilderness stretched in all directions, wild and free. Inside, in the warmth of Drew's embrace, Mabel had found her own freedom, the freedom to love and be loved, not for what she could provide or represent, but for who she truly was. And that, she discovered, was the greatest freedom of all.